Hi there, I'm Ahsan Ali, Shaw, and you're watching me on YouTube and Facebook Live. Today we are going to talk about a modern evolutionary theory, the divergence of human species from races to a political being. If you remember, we have been discussing evolutionary theories for the past 2 weeks. We started our discussion with Charles Darwin's theory of evolution. And last week we had a very detailed discussion on the Lamarckian evolution theory. And today we are going to discuss the modern concept. And you won't find it anywhere else because I couldn't find it anywhere else. So we come up, actually it was Ed's idea, Ed come up with this notion and with this theory. And we are going to discuss that how human beings have been evolving and they have evolved from oasis to become a political being. And to discuss this topic, my guest is Edward Konowicz, and he has joined us from Virginia, United States.
Yeah,
Hey,
hi,
Ed,
Ahsan Ali. How are
I'm
you?
good. I'm doing good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing fine. I'm just
Okay,
going to share the link.
okay. Please do.
I think it's one. The Modern Theory of Evolution, Divergent, Time of the
Yeah,
Human Species.
yes. And
Okay.
how did you come up with this idea of modern theory, or that human beings have evolved from races to a political being?
Well, the problem is
Mhm,
scientists pretend they know something.
mhm,
And when you go and research what they know, you find out they don't know diddly.
mhm.
They don't
Yes.
know much. And I think this is an important topic because politics may be part of evolution, which is what we're
Mhm,
facing today, may be dividing the human race up into two species.
mhm,
And I know that sounds strange, but if you go
mhm,
look at the fossil evidence presented, there is
mhm,
no coherent, no reasonable theory about how humans emerged on this planet. What we're told as a story that there was some ape man from Africa,
mhm,
Homo habilis, Homo erectus, that emerged
mhm,
about 4 million, 2 million years ago and spread to the rest of the world does not make
mhm,
sense. And
mhm,
I don't have the answer, but
mhm.
I can raise
Ah,
intelligent questions, which is what
mhm,
we're being taught is very flimsy guesses,
mhm.
extremely
And
flimsy guesses.
speaking of questions, I have also got some questions about different races because the word races is also in the tagline in the title line. Because when we see our world today, or we look at the human history for the past 2,000 years, we see different races across the world, and they we still have the same races. And if they haven't evolved for the past 2,000 years, how they have evolved for the past 4 million years? It just doesn't make
Yeah,
any sense.
right.
Because Chinese are still Chinese, Western are still Western, the Arab people are still Arab. I have an Indian ancestry. My Indian ancestors are the still same. So why they haven't evolved?
Yeah, I think there. Well, it's not just 2,000 years.
Mhm, mhm.
We're talking in spans of 10,000 years,
Yeah.
and generally, the modern human being that we perceive is
Mhm,
considered to be about 10,000 years old.
mhm,
And before that, they
mhm.
weren't there. You so what happened? You
Mhm,
got you have two major species that emerged as humans. I think it's
mhm,
Homo habilis and
mhm,
Homo erectus.
mhm,
And they supposedly, that's about
mhm,
2 million years ago, migrated out of Africa.
mhm,
But then what we get emerging in Europe and Asia are other
mhm,
human species.
mhm.
And
I was. I was discussing this topic with a friend of mine a few days ago, and I told him that I personally, if you ask me, I believe in the ancient alien theory because we modern human beings are the product of some type of genetic engineering that happened thousands of years ago. We have the evidence from the Egyptian pyramids. We see many statues there. They have the body of human being and the statue of alligator, some type of dog or hen, or some other animals. It means our ancestors saw those things, the experiments were being done, but they didn't know the science behind it. So it means there were some type of definite genetic engineering was involved in the creation of the modern human beings. It's not just only in the Egyptian pyramids, all over the world. They created different type of human beings, and I don't know. And we have the pyramidic structure, the mass mega structure across the world. I think
Well,
they are the true first. Mhm.
there's a big dispute here that's not
Mhm.
officially accepted.
Okay.
And I when we see half animal
Mhm.
like and a hawk and a human being, these
Mhm.
are mythical representations. I don't think they're saying that there was an animal that was half human and half hawk. But
Mhm.
there's something more interesting
Mhm.
is there's these very large humans and
Mhm.
there are these very small humans
Mhm.
waiting on them, serving them. Now, the
Mhm.
explanation was the pharaoh and the ruling class were pictured as being larger. But
Mhm.
if we had humans 5 times the size,
Mhm.
building these pyramids would not have been as difficult.
Mhm.
If the current human beings are the size during the period of the pyramid building, it's
Mhm.
very unlikely those pyramids could have been built. But
Mhm.
if we had human beings 4 times the size and another two-factor in terms of muscle strength, like
Mhm.
chimpanzees are smaller than us and
Mhm.
stronger, they would have been
Mhm.
able to move their blocks with a few
Mhm.
people.
Mhm.
And the drawings of larger and smaller match the
Mhm.
myths, particularly of North American Indians.
Mhm.
There seems to be evidence, not in the scientific journals,
Mhm.
but by anthropologists and scientists, that
Mhm.
there were larger human beings. And we see them appear
Mhm.
not only in China, people 7, 8 feet tall, in
Mhm.
Lithuania, 7, 8 feet tall. That's why they
And
have good basketball team.
we have the elongated skulls all over the world. They have been found. Those skulls are human skulls. They are different from the skull from today. So it means you are right to some extent that they were big. They used to be big,
Well, some were.
and mhm, yeah, to some extent.
I mean, we have what's called, when I was a kid, the tribe was called the Watusis, and
Hmm.
they averaged about 6'6".
Hmm.
And right next to them were
Hmm.
the pygmies or Hottentots.
Hmm.
And I think more, they were called the Tutsis and the Hutsis or something like that. I'm not an expert,
Okay.
but the Watusis were 6'6" on the
Hmm.
average, and the pygmies were like 4 feet tall, and they lived by
Hmm.
each other.
Hmm.
So
Even.
we have this variation of size that
Hmm.
has been somewhat denied.
Hmm.
And the question was it even larger? Because anthropologists report having sent large skeletons to the Smithsonian to have
Hmm.
them totally disappear. And
Hmm.
they seem to be reliable scientists. So just like history is propaganda, the history of the
Hmm.
human being and science is propaganda. We don't know what
Hmm.
the truth is. What we're
Hmm.
told doesn't make sense. And I want to
Hmm.
pursue that. And then we have the
Just
guesses.
mhm,
Like your guess that there was aliens, it's not your
mhm,
guess. A lot of
mhm,
people feel that
mhm,
aliens bred humans. It does
mhm,
look like some type of breeding went
mhm,
on because our
mhm,
ancestor was supposedly Homo erectus 2 million
mhm.
years ago. And now we have Asians, Africans, um,
Europeans.
Europeans, Northern
Mhm,
Europeans, Russians,
mhm, mhm,
American Indians. We have a
mhm,
wide variation, almost as much as in dogs.
mhm.
And of course, that
If
variation we find in dogs was the
mhm,
result of breeding.
mhm. If
But I
if
think
we
there's
have
two.
evolved if we have evolved from the chimpanzees, then why chimpanzees, other chimpanzees, they haven't evolved? It's a very good question, but
Yeah,
I think modern mainstream scientists are unable to answer it.
yeah. Why wasn't there a gorilla city in
Mhm,
Africa?
mhm.
Why didn't the
Yes,
gorillas evolve to at
mhm,
least make a town?
mhm. For the
That
past
makes
two,
no
for the
sense.
past 10,000 years, they haven't evolved for the past. They are still living and they are still breeding. They are still the same. Why have we evolved? Why they haven't evolved?
And see, I have some other theories. For one
Mhm,
thing, when
mhm,
people bred dogs, so you have poodles, uh,
mhm,
dachshunds, and
mhm,
chihuahuas and German shepherds, they didn't
mhm,
know anything about DNA.
mhm,
They didn't use DNA modification to
mhm,
breed different size and different functional dogs.
mhm,
They looked at behavior, they looked at tendencies. So we shouldn't assume that breeding is done in the laboratory. It wasn't.
mhm,
So animals have been domesticated for thousands of years, and this has may have been the turning point. I see
mhm.
three types of human cultures.
Okay.
One based on hunting and gathering, like in the jungles of Indonesia and in
Mhm,
the Amazon. Basically, a tribe, usually under 50 people, probably
mhm,
closer to 20, 25. They live and move in a jungle. They gather roots. They kill small mammals, and
mhm,
they fish, and they're able to survive. And we know that's been going on for thousands of years. But they don't develop much. They have a village, they have a culture and language, but technology and science is sort of restricted to bows and arrows, poisonous darts, and how do you make a hut out of the available materials? And how do you make
mhm,
different types of traps? And how do you find different medicine? In
mhm,
fact, they may be
mhm.
more advanced in herbal medicine than we are in pharmaceutical medicine. But
Indeed, they are. Look at the Chinese; they are still using the organic and herbal medicine, and they live more than 100 years.
yeah, so,
Mhm,
but now that's one type, the hunter gatherer in the
mhm,
jungle.
mhm,
When you get out of the jungle, there are two types of humans:
mhm,
those that are herders,
mhm,
whether it's sheep or cattle, and
mhm,
those that are farmers. And of course, you got some that are in between. The
mhm,
herders, where we get our religion from, we, we get our religion from the herders.
mhm,
And they tended to be thieves because they didn't have the tools, they didn't have the metal, they didn't have the industry because they were busy moving with their herds to more pasture grounds. And they developed tents and rugs and, of course, medicine and weapons of war, weapons to kill animals and people. They were more warlike.
mhm,
And then we had the farmers that developed in the river valley civilizations that were more stable because you were a farmer, now you needed transportation to bring
mhm,
your goods to market. So then we get specialization. And generally what the herders did, the warrior tribes that gave us the warrior god of religion,
mhm,
generally the herders would invade and conquer the
The
farmers.
farmers.
They would
Mm-hmm.
steal from them,
Mm-hmm.
but call it war. So it
Mm-hmm.
was permissible to kill and steal as long as it was war.
Mm-hmm.
And were dominated by the war tribes because they became very sophisticated at stealing, learning different languages, and adapting to different cultures, where
Mm-hmm.
the farmers were much more um, located in their river valley where their source of water was. And if the water dried up, they were in problems.
Mm-hmm.
So we they would have produced three different types of human beings. And we
Mm-hmm.
as human beings have something very strange about us. We need vitamins. Other
Mm-hmm.
animals don't need vitamins,
Mm-hmm.
which is they don't take vitamin A, D, C,
Mm-hmm.
and many of them don't need a protein source. They can synthesize in their body all the amino acids they need, like a cow. Cows
Mm-hmm.
and gorillas are strong, but gorillas don't eat meat.
Mm-hmm.
They don't raise beans,
Mm-hmm.
and they have more capabilities in their body.
Mm-hmm.
So the whole issue, how do human beings arise? And I want to just discuss some general
Mm-hmm.
time
So we
period.
so we have, as you said, there are different three types or two types of human beings. First, the herders, and second are the farmers.
And
And
a
what
few
is the, mhm. A
a
few
few hunter
are
gatherers.
uh-huh.
We probably have in the thousands hunter
Mhm,
gatherers, but we have in the millions herders who tended to
mhm,
be warlike, like the Mongolians.
mhm,
Genghis Khan conquered much of Eurasia, and they were herders. They could
mhm,
move their food supply with their army because they took along the animals that they
mhm,
lived off of. So they became the mercenaries and soldiers, and this is even the Middle East with their religions of war
mhm,
and conquest.
mhm,
But getting back, I mean,
mhm,
that's even Christianity.
mhm,
Jesus is referred to as the Good Shepherd. They were
mhm,
shepherds, they were
mhm,
herders. King David was a herder.
mhm,
Now, what we have occurring is different races that seem to be associated with different languages. So we have the Oriental race, and
mhm,
then we have the intonations of Oriental language
mhm,
and the pictographs used to express it. When we go to
mhm,
Europe, where we have the Caucasian race, we have the European languages based on letters and alphabets
mhm,
and written in this script. Then we go down to Egypt, we have the beginnings with hieroglyphics
mhm,
of communicating, which is a little different than the pictograms of the Oriental languages. It was based on China. I mean, what Korea and Japan use for writing is not their
mhm,
writing. They
mhm,
borrowed the characters. You could call them characters. They're not quite letters. They
mhm,
borrowed the characters from the Chinese.
mhm,
But what's interesting, this is what's super interesting. The human being emerged about 2 million years ago, and that's somewhat
mhm,
accepted. Doesn't mean it's true, but it's
mhm,
generally accepted Homo erectus, and before that, Homo
mhm,
habilis, emerged about 2 to 4 million years ago. And
mhm,
there is good evidence that they migrated into both Asia and Europe about a million years ago, 1
mhm,
million to 2 million years ago. But they didn't survive. What we find in Europe is Neanderthals, Cro Magnon, and now the theory is Cro Magnon evolved into modern man. And
Mhm.
then we have something similar. When you're looking at fossil records from 10,000 to 50,000 years ago in China or Japan or Southeast Asia, none of the records of the bones are Oriental.
Mhm.
The Oriental race is recent, something
Mhm.
like 10,000 years old. You go earlier than that, you don't find Oriental people. You don't find Oriental skeletons.
Mhm.
Now, England wasn't always inhabitable. The, the,
Mhm.
the problem when you study human beings is not global warming. That's not
Mhm.
a problem. The
Mhm.
problem is global cooling and ice ages. Ice
Mhm.
ages came down, however, they came down. I'm not saying it was glacier movement because it could have been floods that froze. There's other explanations for the ice age other than
Mhm.
slow moving glaciers.
Mhm.
But they made many areas uninhabitable. So we see long periods, 100,000 years in England, when England is not inhabited at all. So we have the up and coming and change of the species of human beings. And it's generally accepted, except in North and South America, that humans inhabited most countries from about 30,000 to about 50,000 years, most continents, years ago.
Mhm.
But it's disputed because
Mhm.
what we have is, you know, like war propaganda, human being
Mhm.
propaganda that humans emerged from Africa and then
Mhm.
evolved someplace between 10,000 and 50,000 years ago on the
Mhm.
different continents.
Mhm.
But you know, this is really
But it
sketchy
doesn't make
thinking.
it. But it doesn't make any sense that when we look at this theory that human beings have emerged from the Africa and they moved to different. They migrated to different parts of the world. It doesn't make any sense to me.
I think it's a stretch. And why it's such a
Mhm.
stretch
Mhm.
is it's had a strange echo there. Why it's such a stretch is they find a piece of a jaw or a tooth. Yeah, an anthropologist or researcher finds just a piece of bone of the jaw. They conclude the height, the brain size, and the skin color. From a piece of bone on a jaw, they'll tell you the skin color of the person, that all they have is one piece of a jaw. I don't believe it. I don't
Mhm.
believe they have this amazing power to take a tooth and then
Mhm.
know the color of the skin.
Mhm.
It's ridiculous when you actually
Mhm.
go look at the research and what they found and their conclusion. And they'll give you a face,
Mhm.
here.
Mhm.
They'll
Yeah.
do a whole human being practically from one tooth.
Mhm.
And you begin reading this and you say, well, I can't accept
What?
this as science. It's be different. They found the whole skeleton. It'd be
Mhm.
different if they found a lot of skeletons,
Mhm.
but they're lucky to find bone fragments. And then
Mhm.
they conclude all of this. And then when they go look at the older skeletons, like I think it goes back 300,000 years. Let me check.
Mhm.
What's really
Yeah.
interesting is Siberia.
Yeah, they have
And
created this the foundation. They created the foundation of the modern science or the modern series that are very prevailing all over the mainstream media. They are based on a very fragmented theory that they took one part of the bone and they create the whole this whatever we see it today. It just doesn't make any sense.
no, they
If
don't
we
have
have
like,
the yeah, if we have the skeleton, the whole skeleton of a human body, okay, you can you can guess the skin color or the size and hairs and everything. It makes sense if you have the whole skeleton. But when you have the fragments of the bones or the teeth or something else, You cannot make it. Uh, you cannot tell the color of the person. It's just one fragment or one bone.
Okay, let me read this. I'm going to put up the link to
Mm-hmm.
see if I can get it here, because I think
Okay.
this is a pretty good example of
Mm-hmm.
what we're talking about. And I don't know whether people see these links though.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So
Okay.
anyway,
Mm-hmm.
humans disappear when it gets cold because they don't have, stoves. They don't have that much advanced clothing when we're talking about 50,000, 100,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So being cold is a problem for human beings. Being
Mm-hmm.
warm is not. There's people have survived in deserts and in tropical rainforests. But let me go ahead and find this site and read from it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this was from a cave in Siberia, Russia, one of the
Mm-hmm.
coldest places in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And what they found was bone fragments, and these were called the Denisovan people. The Denisovan people, Denisovan. Probably
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to read it. The
Okay.
Denisovan people probably originated from Africa around 750,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's almost a million years.
Mm-hmm.
And some claim they left earlier. I'm not reading. Thousands of years later,
Mm-hmm.
when sapien species reached Altai, which is in Siberia, they met the Denisovan people, interbred with them.
Mm-hmm.
Ivanov argued. Denisovans still lived in the Denisovan cave. Even this
Mm-hmm.
sentence is ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
Denisovans lived in the cave between 170,000 to 110,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
There were at least two groups of Denisovans with 65,000 years between them. For a long time, the Denisovans and Neanderthals coexisted in this cave.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't believe they all lived in this one cave.
Mm-hmm.
Even how it's said
Mm-hmm.
is silly. For
Mm-hmm.
65,000, 100,000, these two human species lived in this same cave.
Mm-hmm.
Now, now, was this a burial cave that
Mm-hmm.
people buried people? Okay, I'll agree to that. But
Mm-hmm.
could you imagine living someplace for 100,000 years or 60,000
In the same
in
cave?
the same cave? I,
Yeah.
and I think that's intentional.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why is it intentional?
Mm-hmm.
The people who are trapped by the system, and the
Mm-hmm.
system is organized crime, they're under the threat of their life to
Mm-hmm.
repeat the propaganda, whether it's about viruses, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's about who won the war, what
Mm-hmm.
happened to the Nazis during World War II. They say the wrong thing, they could be killed.
Mm-hmm.
So, what they do to justify themselves, they say something ridiculous
Mm-hmm.
that you would have to be totally stupid to believe.
Mm-hmm.
So, the mistakes people see in writing is not done because people are stupid. They have to justify lying because they have to lie to survive. So they put out ridiculous statements that should cue you in. This can't be true. This is too ridiculous.
Mm-hmm. So
So we
how do you think that we have become a political being?
well, I don't have the answers. I have a lot of
Okay.
questions because
Okay.
I do have a rigorous mind, and
Mm-hmm.
I can't convince myself of my theories. I said they're
Mm-hmm.
theories, they're guesses.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot has to do with behavior. And
Mhm.
obviously, a group of 10 or 20 human beings, wherever you want to call them, are going to be superior to two or three. So it became advantageous for different human species to have villages and towns for protection. Not only protection from other human species,
Mhm.
but protection from animals like tigers,
Mhm.
hairy mammoths. Don't forget, human beings lived among giants.
Mhm.
That's not disputed. Hairy
Mhm.
mammoths, large sloths, um, I think, including the saber-toothed tiger, they were
Mhm.
around with people. Now, how did all the saber-toothed tigers disappear? That's an interesting question because there's these
Mhm.
ferocious beasts. They
Mhm.
weren't eating more than elephants. In my last video on my site, I said, you know what?
Mhm.
An elephant eats 300 pounds a day. You want
Mhm.
a pet elephant, it's going to cost you almost 100,000 a year.
Mhm.
So, but they survived.
Mhm.
And the saber-toothed tiger, and there was plenty of prey around buffalo,
Mhm.
elk, moose. Why did the saber-toothed tiger go
It
extinct?
survived. Mhm. It's a very good
I don't
question.
know. I don't have the answers.
Mhm.
I just know
Mhm.
what we're told does not
Mhm.
really make sense.
Mhm.
Now, here's my guess. You ready? I think evolution does not occur much by natural selection. I think
Mhm.
natural selection or adaptation to the environment accounts for a very small part of evolution. I think during certain times of radiation from the sun and from
Mhm.
outer space, the DNA mutates quickly. So I think evolution occurs according to solar weather, that we're in a
Mhm.
period of, of relative calm from the sun and from the galaxy. We're not being radiated. But now
Mhm.
we're being locally radiated from nuclear power plants and from toxic drugs.
Mhm.
So I think why people look Oriental is a few got radiated, and after they got radiated and mutated and changed, began looking Oriental. I think
Mhm.
they communicated this change with viruses. I
Mhm.
think I don't believe there's a mutation in one or two or three individuals, and now they have sex and it's passed on to hundreds of thousands of buffalo. All those
Mhm.
buffalo look alike. I don't think they had a common ancestor. I think there was, some cow like creature, elk, moose, who knows what, evolved into a buffalo. And then there was a radiation period, and a lot of viruses, a lot of retroviruses were generated and
Mhm.
passed on, which is genetic characteristics I think are contagious over generations. And
Mhm.
this
So,
mechanism that DNA communicates is totally discredited. That's why I covered not Charles, I mean Peyton Rouse.
mhm.
Took him 45 years to get the Nobel Prize after he demonstrated that the retrovirus can actually alter the genetic material of a cell. So I think, particularly social animals, how we stay the same and don't diverge is by whom we interact with, and whom we interact with, or with whom we interact. We infect. We infect
Mhm.
each other with
We
not
impact
only
our minds
viruses,
with
but
a
bacteria.
eye. Mhm.
So a culture that's isolated like Japan develops unique characteristics, or tribes in the Amazon, or tribes in Africa. So
Mhm.
as you stay isolated, you get divergent evolution as you get more communication and contact. And human beings started to trade a lot, travel, And of course, with farming, I think the real development of human beings is based on farming. I don't think it's
mm,
based on language.
mm,
Once human beings could farm, they could develop cities, and you need someone to make a plow, you need someone
mhm,
to raise the water buffalo to pull the plow or the horses.
mhm,
You need someone to buy your crops because you've planted a large field. Now you got more than what you need. You need some baker or miller to mill the grain. So the farm is the basis of civilization, and that's
mm,
not emphasized. But once the
okay,
farm is, then what develops is the city and language. And I
mm,
think Moses saw this. He saw that breeding human beings was based upon giving them a different language. So they come out of Egypt no longer speaking Egyptian,
mhm.
they're speaking
They have a
Hebrew,
different language. Mhm,
different language. I think
mhm,
over generations, a different language develops different races depending on the solar weather,
mhm,
depending on the amount of radiation that's allowing mutation. So I think evolution occurs in surges. It doesn't occur largely over long periods of time, but short periods of extreme stress.
So the
That's my
question is,
guess.
so the question is, where is okay, if they are emerging through radiations, and we have the radiation today, but it wasn't there for more than 100 years ago. There were no radiation. So where was that radiation coming from? From the
Well, I
solar
think there's two
system?
sources. I think one is the sun, and the
Mm-hmm,
sun has been in a relatively quiet period.
mm-hmm,
And then the other one is the center of the galaxy, which is called the black hole. It actually radiates a pulse. I forget, every 10,000 years or something, there's a
mm-hmm,
huge radioactive pulse that could wipe out much of life. But I
mm-hmm,
don't think it does. I think it encourages um, mutations, which is DNA is like a little antenna, and certain radiation activates it and causes it to alter itself. And it's related to behavior,
mm-hmm,
which I think evolution is much more based on behavior. That's why I'm not quite a Lamarckian. You don't
mm-hmm,
cut off the tail of an animal, or it's the animal evolves as the behavior changes.
mm-hmm,
And monkeys, you can
mm-hmm,
see that in India, they make too much trouble.
mm-hmm. Yes, they
They're,
do.
they're too much troublemakers. So it's difficult for them to control themselves.
Mm-hmm,
And I think different consciousness has different tendencies. So the different species allows different consciousness expression. I think it's much more based on consciousness than on random mutations that adapt to the environment. I think it's based on how the consciousness directs itself, like the peacock. The male
mm-hmm,
peacock's got this huge feather display. And
mm-hmm.
it
So,
may, but I was a female, and I'm
mm-hmm,
not a female, and I'm definitely not a female peahen. Is it a
mm-hmm,
peacock and a peahen? I was a
mm-hmm,
peahen, and I said, "Oh, that guy's got too many feathers, too arrogant."
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I think there's a tendency in animals to be compulsive or obsessive, and they develop a behavior pattern, and that behavior pattern, particularly during periods of rapid evolution, which is rapid mutation, affects how the species look. And
Mhm,
not all adaptations are for survival.
mhm.
We keep saying
So,
survival of the fittest. It's usually survival of the sexiest, because you could
mhm,
be the strongest one around, but if you don't reproduce,
mhm. You're not
those
going to say.
characteristics are not going to be carried on.
Mhm.
But I think
So,
there's two mechanisms:
mhm.
reproduction and retrovirus transfer. But just, I
So,
mean, it could be a lot of other ideas. They're guesses. What we're taught
Mhm.
is absurd. I mean, it's
Mhm.
ridiculous what we're taught.
So, what are
Yeah.
your final thoughts?
What my final thoughts are,
Mhm.
um, let's stop giving authority
Mhm.
to science because science
Mhm.
is too stupid and too corrupt. We see
Mhm.
that with medicine. We see
Mhm.
that with the so-called vaccines.
Mhm.
The doctors are too corrupt and really too stupid.
Mhm.
You know, yeah, they learned a lot, they did well in school, but if they can't figure out fentanyl is killing people, they can't figure out that smoking was bad for people's lungs. They couldn't figure out on their own asbestos. They didn't figure out the major stuff. The
Yes.
lawyers had to sue them. After lawyers sued them, then the changes came about.
Mhm.
People have to stop believing in experts and see, well, they don't understand everything. They all
Mhm.
pretend they do.
Mhm.
There's an expression in the Old Testament that I think it was Samson. He,
Mhm.
he slew all these people with the jawbone of an ass.
Mhm.
And I think it's symbolism
Mhm.
that that most of these people are just like these anthropologists that claim, oh, from this tooth or this jawbone, they know the color of skin, they know how the person looked, they know everything about them. And all they got is a piece of a jawbone. And that's how
Mhm.
flimsy much of science is. And people
Mhm.
can't believe it. That's why I'm going on. No, don't believe
Mhm.
these experts. They're looking
Mhm.
to make money. They're not
Mhm.
giving you the truth.
Mhm.
Now, I don't know
Mhm.
what the truth is, but I know it's not what they're saying
Mhm.
because I can see the duplicity, I can see the contradictions in what they're saying. And other people, even some doctors, then lose their license, can tell you and explain why the narrative, why the official position coming out of the medical schools, coming out of the government is wrong, is based on
Mhm.
nonsense. And they
Mhm.
just make stuff up. And then because they're repeated on TV, people believe them. And I'm here
Mhm.
saying, stop believing in them.
Mhm.
Look
It's
at
all
look at what we're taught.
the mainstream science is all about guesses. They just throwing it on the wall, whatever it sticks, so they call it a science.
Well, it's
That's what I
control
think.
guesses. They can't do
Yeah.
their own guesses. They're told
Mhm.
what to guess.
Mhm.
You can't do your own guesses in science.
Mhm.
You'll be fired.
Mhm.
The
Yeah.
guesses are restricted. And there's the official guesses. And they're
Mhm.
usually biased so someone can make a profit
Mhm.
or control
I
more
think.
people. They're
Mhm.
not guesses at the truth. They're guesses to control people.
Mhm. I think that's why we have become a political being to control. That's why we see the censorship, the lies, and the manipulation, and and the control freedom of speech. I think that's what the evolution is all about, or that's where it has led us to this point.
So for evolution,
Yeah.
breeding is
Mhm.
maybe not only using retroviruses and other mechanisms to change
Mhm.
the DNA or genome. It may
Mhm.
also breeding be based on what behavior do you allow and
Mhm.
encourage and what behavior do you stop.
Mhm.
But with the story we're given, no, the
Uh,
origins of the human races make no sense.
yeah.
The out of
Uh,
Africa routine, you look at the years, you look at
mm,
the evidence that was found. The evidence is very flimsy, very
mhm.
limited. When you put it all together,
It
makes no
doesn't make
sense.
any sense. Yes, I think we have discussed enough, and we have discussed a very key questions, and it's more than enough to to digest it. And the people who have been watching us, they understand. But for the new person, it's very difficult to digest. I think we have covered enough. We started our discussion around about 2 or 3 weeks ago from Charles Darwin theory, then Lamarck theory, and today we have discussed in detail summarize the whole concept of evolutionary theory. That what we are, the modern science, or the mainstream science tells us about the evolution, it doesn't make any sense. And if you have some other theory or some other views different to us, then please share it in the comment box below. I'll answer it to you. I will get back to you as soon as I can. And yeah, thanks for watching.
Okay,
And
I'll see
yeah,
everybody.
yeah, see you
Okay.
next week. Good day, good night, wherever you are.